Hi everybody, hope you had a wonderful weekend. I'm Jeremy Cordeaux. Pete is behind the camera. The Court of Public Opinion is rolling for another week. If you're watching us on Facebook, welcome to the garage. If you're listening to us as a podcast anywhere in the world, I hope you, what do they say, Pete? You subscribe or make us a favourite or something. And apparently it pops up and reminds you when each of the sessions here in the Court of Public Opinion are put down or put up. Better not say put down. No, we don't put things down on this. Well, we do put a few things, ideas down. We don't agree with absolutely everything, I can tell you. April 24th. Happy birthday to Shirley MacLaine. 1934. She was born. 1934. American actress and mystic. She did go that way, didn't she? She really was into that sort of thing. The Trouble with Harry, Irma la Douce, Sweet Charity, Being There, Steel Magnolias, Terms of Endearment. The one I loved her in was The Apartment with Jack Lemmon. If ever you get a chance to see that. And the most wonderful theme music for Auntie and Taisha. Theme from The Apartment is just great music. I used to use it a lot on the radio show. Not all of it, just stabs, grabs kind of thing. 2004, Estee Lauder, American entrepreneur, cosmetic queen. She dies at the age of 97. And she looked about 19. Well, I'm not really sure about that, but if you were Estee Lauder, you couldn't really look anything but terrific, could you? Couldn't afford to. Let's see, what else have I got? 1954, Australia and Russia break diplomatic relations. 1954, well, that was back in the McCarthy era in America. I think everybody severed relations with the USSR back then. 1184 BC, the Greeks enter Troy using the Trojan horse. Beware Greeks bearing gifts was a slogan that was born that day. 1986, the film Crocodile Dundee with Paul Hogan becomes, it premieres in Australia and ends up being the highest grossing film in the United States of America. That was in 1986. That interested the taxman for many, many years. But the funny thing about that movie was they told me, I don't remember where I heard it, but there wasn't one single investor in that movie that got his money back. And yet it was, for a whole year, the highest grossing movie in America. I don't know. How can you be so successful and not make any money for your investors? Don't know. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger is inaugurated as the 265th Pope on this day in 2006. He's now a Pope Emeritus, really, not a practicing Pope. I'm totally out of my depth here. I don't know how you describe a retired Pope. Oh dear. Wallace Simpson, American divorcee. British King Edward abdicated for her. Anyway, she dies at the age of 89 on this day in 1986. Wallace Simpson. Daniel Defoe, the English novelist. Robinson Crusoe, most famous for, dies at the age of 70 in 1731. Winston Churchill is knighted by Queen Elizabeth II on this day in 1953. Barbra Streisand, American pop singer. People, The Way We Were, evergreen. Funny Girl, What's Up Doc? She wrote plays and musicals and sang and acted. Great talent. Not the easiest person to deal with, apparently. Emmys and Grammys and Oscars and Tonys everywhere. Born in Brooklyn in 1942. JFK accepts sole responsibility following the Bay of Pigs. That was in 1961. Eastman Kodak, founded by George Eastman in 1888. Wow. Ernest Shackleton and 5 men of the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition launch a lifeboat from the uninhabited Elephant Island in the Great Southern Ocean to organise a rescue for the ice-trapped ship Endurance on this day in 1916. I don't have a note to tell me whether they were successful or not. And Paul McCartney says there's no truth in the rumour that he's dead. That was in 1969. Anyway, if you remember the day for any reason at all, I hope it's going to be a happy one and a happy week. I got some, I'm really interested in cars. I got something on my telephone a little while back to tell me that Range Rover, that'd be fair, wouldn't it, Pete, to say that you've got a Land Rover? Would be one of the great automotive brands in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great brand. You know what they're going to do? Range Rover, Defender and Discovery, very successful sub-brands. They're all, 4x4s and four-wheel drives. They're going to ditch, after 75 years, they're going to ditch the Land Rover name. This is another example of the 12-year-old in the marketing department. Why would anyone think it's a good idea to get rid of a name, a brand, like Range Rover? Or you wouldn't get rid of Jaguar. I mean, Jaguar is owned by the same people. It's an Indian company. But why would you buy Land Rover? I imagine you paid a pretty penny for it. Why would you buy it and then decide you don't want to keep the name? Bizarre. Anyway, there is no accounting. There's just, in this court of public opinion, reporting. Now, we've got a surging economy. Stock market is mostly good. Internationally, you might say terrific. On certain days, it certainly is terrific. Unemployment is down, a 50-year low, in fact. And, of course, inflation is up. So the only thing the Reserve Bank, the rebooted Reserve Bank or whatever, the only thing they can responsibly do is lift the interest rates. Look, it's very simple. Simple sort of rule of thumb. When the economy is on its knees, interest rates are low. But when things are on the up and up, so too are the interest rates. Now, which would you want? Which would you find it easier to live with? Don't confuse the good news with the bad news, is what I'm saying. And let me say this about the revised Reserve Bank Board, or as I said to you Friday, there'll be 2 boards and 2 sets of board directors. I did say it was a good idea to look at these things regularly. We have to keep an eye on things. Nothing more important, of course, than the Reserve Bank of Australia. But when Labor was in power, I can remember clearly when Paul Keating was the Treasurer, and in the day, my impression was they handed out positions on the Reserve Bank Board like the Liberals handed out knighthoods. There was I would call it a ragtag collection of Labor supporters and trade unionists. This is back when we had interest rates of 22%. I wonder who was in charge of that. Now, when Paul Keating announced to us all, I don't remember the day, I remember the interview though, he looked suitably embarrassed. He announced to us all with poetically, it was almost poetry, he called it the recession we had to have. Now, as I said, this review of the RBA is good. But the RBA is responsible for things like seeing to it that the economy does not have 2 negative quarters, therefore we go into recession. Its job is to keep the economy ticking along and inflation under control. But always remember, governments often make a decision, and then they get a group of people to review or inquire. 3 months later, this group independently, absolutely independently announces the decision that the government had already made. Don't ask me why. Was it shared responsibility or something? Now, the people who brought you the corrupt NDIS, that's the federal government, now asks us to cope with the latest Medicare disaster. This is where people looking for a specialist can wait up to 6 years for an appointment in Adelaide and 8 years in Melbourne. Now, before Medicare, before Medibank, that didn't happen. It just didn't happen. I don't know. Why don't we just go back and do things the way we used to a time when things actually worked? Be simple, wouldn't it? Meg O'Neill, head of Woodside, I don't know if you listen sometimes to ABC News Radio because they broadcast the press club luncheon. And last week, Meg O'Neill, head of Woodside, was the guest, and she made some very interesting points at the press club. Now, Woodside's one of the biggest companies in Australia. I think it's the biggest corporate taxpayer in the country. And her story, Meg's story, was most interesting to listen to. How she had to placate the activists and the lobbyists, all of the red tape and the black tape and the cultural stuff. All of that she has to navigate before she can do her job. And her job is, of course, the development and the progress of her company and indeed the country. The difficulties, mostly for, I think, irrational and politically correct reasons, the obstacles in her path, what you have here is a whole lot of people taking risks. They risk their capital. They put their shoulder to the wheel. The investment that ordinary Australians, mums and dads, have in Woodside, I don't know how many billions, hundreds of superannuation funds everywhere, I would imagine, would all be heavily invested in Woodside. Great company. And why do they do that? To make money and progress themselves and the nation. And what the company does is to go out and look for oil and look for gas. Very risky, but highly valuable and negotiable commodities on the world market. These people pay for the pensions. Companies like Woodside. They pay for the corrupt NDIS. They pay and they pay and they pay and they pay. And in fact, as she said, I'm pretty sure she said that they were the biggest corporate taxpayer in the country. Yet they've got to manoeuvre around an absolute minefield of obstacles. They can't do this, they can't do that, they can't go here, they can't go there. This is one country, for God's sake. It's our country. We should all have a common purpose. We're allowing Aboriginal people, 500,000 Aboriginal people, and I would argue not all of them. I would argue the white activists, mostly. We are allowing the white activists to strangle the prosperity of this nation, all the while taking $35 billion a year out of the economy for themselves. Now, where do they think that money comes from, I wonder? We should sit down and have a long talk and use our voice. Something that's worried me for a while is this endless advertising on television for funeral funds, funeral insurance. Now, I don't know what you think, but I think it's a rip-off. I don't care what they say or where they come from or who's offering it. If you want to provide for your funeral, and I think it's a thoughtful thing to do, you open at the local bank a simple bank account, put a few dollars in each month, a few dollars in each week. Now these, I'll call them hustlers, these people, entrepreneurs, promoters, make millions out of this sort of stuff. if we're stupid enough to go along with it. I think they should ban funeral funds, and I'm not a great one for banning anything. Oh yes, I would ban the advertising of gambling on television. They play with that. They say, let's have gambling advertising on after the kids have gone to bed. No, just get rid of it. The Greens, I don't know if you've heard this, but the Greens yelling, you can't live on work support, can't live on the dole. A lot of people, including the Greens obviously, want job seeker, that's the dole, to be increased. At the moment it's about, $50 a day. The critics want it to be set a shade under the aged pension. Now look, the sad truth about this is you almost can't make the dole comfortable. It's meant to be a lifeline, not a hammock, not a way of life or a lifestyle. I've been through this with my kids, and believe me, it's not easy, I know. It's a situation that can't accommodate. It has to motivate. There are so many jobs out there. It almost reminds me of when I came out of school, and there were 2 or 3 jobs for each and every school leaver. We should have today almost nil unemployment. You can't make unemployment attractive. Survivable, yes, but not attractive. It's not a way of life. Have I got any time left? The event has been cancelled, but I'd love to know why this Melbourne cafe owner thought it was a good idea to have a children's party and the entertainment provided by drag queens. Now, there's nothing wrong with children's parties, and there's nothing wrong with drag queens. But I can't for the life of me see why you'd want to mix them. Unless you were just looking to create a front page or a sensation. Now, I've got to answer some of the mail. Sue, bless her heart, Sue talking about, regularly corresponds with us, talking about the Wesley aged care homes in Sydney that closed, all 3 of them. The main problem, Sue says here, the main problem is the Labor government's election promise to insist that there be a registered nurse in every facility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And Sue points out it's not affordable or possible. It's another case, Sue, another case of the road to hell being paved with good intentions. But when you find you've gone down the wrong track, go back. Now, speaking of going back, can I go back to this letter that Jacinta Price, Senator Jacinta Price, who is the new Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs, sent to Pete? Profoundly important. Let me read some of it again. Not my words, but I think I would love everybody to have this. Just to give you a bit of context, this is a bombshell letter that Jacinta Price has sent out to people who follow her. She calls herself Fair Australia. Jacinta Price, on behalf of Fair Australia. I guess if you Google that, you can end up getting these newsletters as well. But she calls this a bombshell that Albo tried to hide. You know how the Prime Minister, she writes, keeps saying the Voice is a modest change to the Constitution. Well, the real agenda behind the Voice referendum has finally been revealed. Secret government documents from this, now I've not heard of these people, but there are some 100 Aboriginal organisations around Australia. This is one called the National Indigenous Australians Agency. They were forced to release under Freedom of Information laws their documentation. And one of the things that Jacinta Price has republished here is, any voice to Parliament should be designed so that it could support and promote a treaty-making process. That's the real main game. Anyway, she goes on to talk about what that actually involves. You know, fixed percentage of gross national product, rates and taxes and royalties. Australia got a whole country for nothing. They haven't begun to pay for it yet. That is a pretty chilling thing to see. And the part I didn't read to you before, I'll read to you now. According to these documents, they want to abolish the Australian flag because the Australian flag symbolises the injustices of colonisation. This is why I get so angry when Albo says this is a modest proposal, writes the senator. What's modest about forcing you to change your flag or pay a percentage of your entire economy as reparations? Sounds a bloody big change to me. Yes, Jacinta, me too. Just to be super clear, this is how the plan works, or how they envisage it will work. They enshrine the divisive voice in the Constitution, and it's there forever. The voice forces Australians into a treaty. The treaty means Australians pay a percentage of their GDP, that is a percentage of the entire nation's economy, to the people of the voice every year. On top of that, Australians are forced to pay rates and land taxes and royalties to the voice. This is why Albo wants you to think you're voting on a modest change. Because when Australia finds out the truth, there is no way anyone would support it, let alone enshrine it in the Constitution forever. Yours in unity, Senator Jacinta Price, a shadow minister of the federal Parliament. And I think she probably sends these out regularly. When Pete, you get a new one?
I've got another one I haven't read yet, yes.
Well, please bring it in later in the week.
I was thinking, Jeremy, she might make a good leader of the Liberal Party.
Well, look, I think she could lead anything. I think she's terrific.
Yeah.
She's terrific. I would think most Aboriginal people should be honoured to have such an eloquent, literate, persuasive, intelligent voice. You know, not something here Trojan horse-like, the voice, trying to get in and then, well, as the Prime Minister said, we'll give you the details later. Well, I don't think we want these sort of details, and if Jacinta is right, we are just so close to this edge of a cliff as to be really frightening. And of course we're going to spend $100 million on this referendum. For what purpose? We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Jeremy Cordeaux. Peter Clayton and I will be back in the Court of Public Opinion. Believe in yourself, and goodbye for now.